Excellent. Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar we're going to run today about the Influence the Future report that we've created over the last few months. And today we've got Mark Day, the professor at Henley Business School, that works with us on the report, and also Mark Hubbard, another fellow director at Future Purchasing. So we're going to make it as interactive as we possibly can do. We've got some of the results that we want to share and get Mark also to talk about the way that some of the analysis was done, so that we can open up the floor to questions about, the principles that we use behind it, as well as some of those interesting results. So I'll hand over to Mark in a second, but just as a bit of background, what we did with the report, the purpose of it was threefold, really. Firstly, as ever, since we first done this, we've been looking to identify what are the practices that leaders use to put in place for category management success, and what drives success. How much of extra value do leaders who do these activities, how much extra value do they achieve? And then thirdly, how can we turn all of these learnings into some sort of overall playbook that other people can use and pick up from? Because we've noticed over the years that, to be honest, category management sometimes is very successful in organizations and sometimes is less so. So we try to codify with this approach, what are the good practices that people should at least consider? So that's the background to the research. I'd like to introduce Mark, if you'd like to just give a quick overview of yourself, Mark.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Professor of Strategy and Operations Management at Henley Business School in the UK. But I've got a heritage of working in procurement for a long time. In fact, Mark and I have been working together for about 20 years. So we've brought together a particular approach to this, which is built on a capabilities-based view of strategy. And we've started to look in detail at this capability called category management. And we've done 5 iterations of the study now. I've done 2012, 2016, 2018, 2021, and 2024. So we've got this latest set of results for you about 2024, but we can also talk about the history of the results as well, and how things have changed, how things have not changed. So that's the objective for today, is to talk about these latest set of results. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you. And Henley Business School, would you like to give a quick overview of where you're based?
Yeah, sure. We're based globally. We have campuses in different parts of the world. We also have a very large campus network in the UK, based around the southeast of England. We've got 2 sites principally that we deliver from. We've got a full service business school, and we're triple accredited. And there's about 150 academics. I'm part of the Strategy and International Business Group. That's where my research team reside. And we've got a good reputation in that area as well. So we've got a variety of different program offerings, right from undergraduate. And most of the work that we try to do is very applied. And you'll see how we apply a research-based way of thinking through the results of the work that we've done here.
And I think it's great now there's an opportunity for people as we go through this to ask questions. Also some, more perhaps not just about the survey, but about how category management might link more to business strategy, as we have Mark here, and that's his specialism. So, by the way, questions as they come through, Mark H here will moderate, and we will decide whether or not we should pick up questions as we go through, or leave them to the end, depending on the complexity of those questions. So ourselves, Future Purchasing, our background is very much around category management and transforming capability across an organization. Changes to the operating model. We've worked with lots of major organizations globally over the years, and we continue to do other things that relate to strategic procurement, like supplier management and business partnering. So a long heritage now, 21 years, unbelievably, over that time period, working in this area specifically. It's given us a lot of focus, and we've got the experience from doing it as well, and implementation. That means that some of our experiences bleed through into the questions and the survey. So what are we going to do today? We're going to look at some of the key findings. We're going to look at the background to the research and, ask Mark various questions about how he's gone about doing the analysis. We'll look at some of the sectoral performance and the top practices, as this is an area that Mark's particularly interested in. And also we'll look at the value delivery that we can see from the survey results. So the structure, I mean, we've evolved this over the years, to be honest, and then in about 2020 we started looking at the Galbraith star model and found that we were pretty close to the sort of headings that are used within that, and we'll look at how we group the questions under those sort of areas. But from your own experience, Mark, how have you seen the structure that we've used iterate over time?
Well, we started off with this a slightly adapted words to this 5+1 structure. And essentially what we've got in here are two big groups of capabilities, things which are about designing and specifying what you do, which is what we call ostensive capabilities. And the other side is performative capabilities, and they're about the doing bit of it. So you'll see inside the wording of the questions, we're not only talking about the design of a capability, in this case, category management, but also about how we go about seeing how it's done. Because that gives us an insight really into why organizations differ in terms of performance. Some are better at adopting and ingraining the capabilities, others are not so good at that, and there's a performance difference there between those two groups of organizations. And we'll group the organizations for you in terms of people who are really outperforming, people who are performing effectively, and people who are just starting. But the origin of how we can see that difference is through these 5 around the edge and the one in the middle. The one in the middle is about performance assessment. So that's value impact.
Thanks. So yeah, as we say, all of the questions are structured in that. And when we first started this, before Mark became involved, I think our questioning approach was a bit more haphazard. But over the years, we've become a bit more structured with how we do it, and they're much more valid the way that we've approached it. Less variation in the questioning approach. So some of the key takeaways from the research, and of course these are a sort of headline type figures here. So starting on the top right there, 86% of stakeholders don't understand their role in Catman. So this is about the aspect of how we go about educating, communicating with stakeholders and what their role is, what's in it for them, and what the benefits are going to be. So clearly there's a very big gap there, and this is the perception of the community that responded, which are all procurement people. So they're saying, actually, in our case, stakeholders aren't fully getting what they should be doing with this. And we think consequently, you look at that very low number next, 11% of stakeholders have sufficient time, work time for Catman. And that's one of the big giveaways, I think, in terms of why there's lots of value available. It is because essentially you're not getting that collaboration that we all talk about in category management, but is not seen often as much as you'd like it to be. So without that collaboration, there's a big gap on the value delivery, the potential. Thirdly, 28% of category managers have sufficient work time for Catman. Again, we'd never probably get a zero figure for this, or rather 100% saying that there is actually, no more we can do in category management. We can see that, many people feel that if they had more time to put into this activity rather than perhaps sourcing or supplier management, then they would get more value out. 36% of category managers apply category management with excellence. And this is a bit of again, another giveaway that the respondents are saying our teams actually aren't that great at doing what we think they should be doing. It's the skills around this, as we'll see later, some of the key areas. So a big gap there. Also, 20% of respondents have excellent category strategy. So this is a key output, as we all know, having a good strategy which can then get implemented, but only 20% of people say that their strategies are excellent. And we did use that word excellent because if this is a key deliverable from the process, we really want it to be of a good standard, but lots of gaps there. And then 30% of respondents have sufficient financial investment in Catman. It's one of those perennial things, how much of an ROI are we expecting from category management? And often that case up we don't think is made perhaps as strongly as it could be. So overall, and we'll touch on this coming up, the value component, we see three types of value within category management being delivered, and there is lots of value still available. Only 32%, we're told, of the available gets delivered. So that's the sort of headlines. And this is really the start of the analysis. Mark, do you want to take over from here in terms of how you did the maturity grouping?
Yeah, so we first of all looked at maturity in terms of looking at standard deviations from a mean. So looking at three distinctly different groups in terms of their segmentation. And that led us to roughly three groups where we can start to categorize significant differences by performance type. We were talking about myself and Mark were reflecting on why we ended up with three different maturity groups, and what our readers of the survey about 6 years ago said to us, it's okay to have real outperformers, but what are people doing in the middle and what people are doing at the lower end? Can you divide them into more meaningful groups so I can feel like I'm part of a group and I understand what to do to get into the next group? So we ended up with a group of people who are starters, who are about 3/4 of our respondents. The improvers are about 20%, and the leaders are 7%. And if we look at each time we've done this, so it's 5 times now that we've done the research, we end up with these three groups roughly about 80, 20, 80, 25, 80, 75, 20, and 5. So the leadership group is fairly consistent in terms of it being about 5% of the overall group. Improvers are about 20%, and starters are a bulk group of people, and they are statistically significantly different in terms of membership. So in other words, performance is different in each of these three groups, and you'll see that coming through the data shortly.
And when we originally did it, before you became involved in the first iteration, Mark, we actually asked people the question, where do you see yourself, based on some sort of broad criteria? And then you've moved us away from that over the year, well, immediately actually, and said, no, actually, you can analyze the results and group people more meaningfully than they can group themselves or categorize themselves.
Yeah, so we used to have one question. We still actually do have the one question. How do you rate your performance? I mean, if we just ask you one question on how you perform in terms of your category management capability, it's not an accurate measure, because we need to ask more questions about what you actually do day to day, and that gives us a much more accurate measure of how you perform. So the one question versus the bank of questions we ask our very kind participants, the larger bank is much more insightful in terms of looking at performance differences.
Mark, I should have said actually, Mark H, that is, we should be using the Q&A part of the tool, isn't it,
Yes.
to get some questions in there. So excellent, you put that in there. Are there any questions at this stage that have come through?
No.
No. Okay, fine. We'll move on then. So the next aspect we want to look at is the overall scores. As you see here, we group people, as Mark said, starters, improvers, leaders. We've got the 6 dimensions that we use in the survey, and you can see, as you'd expect, the starters, lower scores. And actually this year, you notice the scores, or we noticed, the gap between the improvers and the leaders is less than it was previously. But overall scores, which we'll then drill down into, and in the report itself, which I'll put the mechanism to get hold of it, the QR code, later on, you'll see that. But actually within each section, there is probably about 10 questions in each area, and you can get a drill down on each of those particular areas. So not much to say other than at this level, we see a big difference between improvers and leaders and starters. So let's move on. Because then what we did, or you did, Mark, to be more accurate, you did an assessment of the industry performances. You've done this every time as well, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. And we were reflecting also back on do these groupings change? In other words, our overall highest mean performer, if you look at the chart here, is oil, gas, chemicals and mining, with the yellow bar indicating that their median performance is the highest at about 3.8. These industries don't change a huge amount. Sometimes we have more industry represented because we have a sample from that industry and we can include them. But in overall terms, it's been remarkably consistent that industries do vary by performance. And there's obviously reasons for that. We could speculate what they are in terms of maybe opportunity from investment and procurement team or whatever it would be, or the particular cyclical impact of certain economic factors on an industry, for example. But in overall terms, this has remained fairly stable by industry type.
And what does the graph actually show? Because most people may be aware, but the plotting is it a whisker diagram, or is that the technical phrase?
Yeah, that's the right technical phrase for it. It's called a box plot.
Yeah.
And it's got whiskers on it. So the whiskers go into the top and the bottom. They go to the 95th percentile, if you like. So it's top 95 down to 5. The main box is the 75th percentile. So if you're at the lower end of the box, you're a lower performer than the median, which is the middle. And if you're towards the top, past the box and into the whiskers, at the upper end, you're an outperformer. If you go into the whiskers at the bottom end, you're an underperformer. And if you go outside the whiskers, you are either a complete outperformer at the top or a complete underperformer at the bottom.
Yeah, and as you say, what we're thinking about doing next is doing a bit of a comparison over the years to see how this has moved around a bit. Because one of the things that we reflect on is sometimes, with working on client projects, sectors that you may not be totally thinking would be an area that would be leading, because the persons come from perhaps automotive, or not to stereotype those guys, but it's more in their DNA, I would say. But they go to a banking sector, for example, and in that particular organization, they can drive the performance uplift very quickly.
I noticed a question from Harry there in the Q&A about performance over by industry type over a number of years. Anecdotally, I can tell you that oil, gas, chemicals, and mining seem to outperform consistently over the 5 iterations, and also do retail and consumer goods as well. Manufacturing and industrials, we have a clear performance differentiation as well. But what I'm planning to do is look at all 5 iterations, and in the future we'll distribute a small summary of that for you to start to see and graph over time how these industrials change, how these industry sectors change in terms of performance. The one thing I must say, though, that just to indicate that the thickness of that box there also indicates the variance in performance inside an industry as well. So the thicker the box, the more variance in performance. So, for example, with technology and telecoms, not as much variance in the performance of the participants in that case.
Are there any other questions, Mark? Just to
Yeah, I've just got one through, which is looking at the previous slide, which is asking if you're a starter and want to improve, which pillar of the 6 should we start out with?
Well, that is a good prompt, because that's where we're going to go to next, actually. So. And that wasn't from one of our own team either. So over to you, Mark, because you've got the top 20 practices here, the analysis that you've done.
Yeah, so this is the direct response to that question, I guess, at a more detailed level. So I wanted to do this analysis because if I'm a procurement professional and I'm leading a team, I want to know exactly what I need to do in a very specific way to improve my performance. And as you can see, we have the top 20 practices that create the most impact. So, for example, with rank order number 1 there, embed a range of technical capabilities across your team. These behavioural features come out consistently year on year between the surveys that we've done. So these are about the deeper ingraining inside of the procurement team of the capabilities necessary to perform category management. But also they are reflective as well of the performative capabilities required. So the things that we do day to day to ingrain category management as the de facto way of operating in terms of procurement, not just inside the team, but also inside of the work that stakeholders do on our behalf, because sometimes it's not necessary to have a central procurement team looking after all of the categories. Sometimes that's done by stakeholders themselves. And as you can see, we have some very strong behavioural features that are coming through: expert knowledge, behavioural capabilities, a clear demonstration of category management expertise. And these consistently will appear at the top. So the salmon coloured ones are fairly consistent year on year on year. They slightly change in the ordering, but they're always at the top. And from that further down, we then start to look at issues to do with connection to the business. And they're a very strong feature as well. So two important things to take away from this: the capabilities that you have inside the team in terms of behavioural and skills are the first place to start. And if you can start again, do two at the same time, deeper connection to stakeholders, and that will get you a performance uplift immediately.
And what we can see on the right hand side is that the scores from the report showing how many people agreed or disagreed as a percentage. So you can see there on the first of the pink ones, and that's because it's in the stakeholder engagement dimension. Communicate with your business stakeholders to ensure they have an excellent understanding, as we looked at earlier as one of the headlines, low score. Yeah, it is definitely a gap of 14% on average. Okay, there is another page of these. So we said we'd do the top 20, and some of the process ones follow up, Mark, in blue in the next grouping, and they all came out into specific groups, which was an interesting change from previous years, where we've seen the capabilities more scattered around in terms of which dimension they came from. So with the colours essentially of those ID numbers were in a bit of a random order, whereas now they're for interesting reasons, I guess, they've come out in a specific way.
Yeah, I guess you can start to see that potentially on this second page, we start to see the foundational issues for Capman coming through, such as toolkits. Toolkits allow people. The toolkit is a means to an end, if you like. Proper quality standards, the proper use of a toolkit in a flexible way, so that you don't use one toolkit for a small category versus using the same toolkit for a large category. It's flexible enough so you can do things quickly or more slowly if necessary, if you've got a bigger spend going through it. As we can see then, there might be capabilities here which are process related, but on top of the process, we have the behavioural component. So that may be what we're seeing through these results.
Yeah, and for a specific organisation, obviously, you know, if there are specific gaps, some of them that are further down in the rankings that are not here but are part of the overall survey could still be totally relevant and add lots of value for a specific organisation. But in general, these are the ones that you saw having more impact on the performance outcomes.
Yeah, and there is consistency between our surveys over the last 5 iterations. We constantly get the same top 20,
yeah,
minor variations. Yeah.
Couple of questions, if I can just throw them in. Is there an indication of how long it takes to get from a starter to an improver? I assume there's I guess we would say that it normally takes a reasonably well-structured program to be able to make that sort of movement, which is well thought through. And we normally say a couple of years it's not an immediate thing. There's no quick fixes. You're doing a lot of changes over a number of areas, but you see steady progress and improvement and value over a couple of years. Does that sound right?
Yeah, 2 to 3 years, I would say, at least for some, you know, depending on the complexity of the organisation and the geographical footprint, business unit structures, etc. It can be harder to drive things, but yeah, 2 to 3 years seems like based on experience, that would be what we'd be wanting to put in front of people. Getting to leader, it really does depend on you know, how much appetite you've got for it, because I think that takes a you know, you've got to have a real business requirement to do it, and it's going to take probably more time. And each incremental piece, like any curve like that, is going to be going to take you longer and probably cost more.
Another quick question: have we got more detailed breakdown in the public sector about how different agencies or bodies are performing?
No, I mean, we'd love to do it. I mean, if central government in the UK or elsewhere would be interested in to doing it, when we've talked about this with them before, you could actually get all of the departments in a particular government to or particular country to respond, and you could see then relative ratings between them. And I think that would be a really powerful thing to do because it isn't looked at in the public sector as closely. People say they're doing it. Our experience is there's pockets of great work, but there's plenty of things to go for, and getting people out of siloed programs into cross-cutting categories is one of the key components there. But there is progress being made, but it would be good to do that comparison for sure. We should be speaking to some people in the centre to try and get that going in the UK.
Exactly. One last question, which relates to this particular page. How did we select the top 20 Catman best practices?
That's a question for me, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we go through a process of looking at the relationships between each question, so each rank order category, each practice, and its relationship to performance. So the stronger the relationship to performance, the higher it goes up the rank. And we use a method called partial least squares to do that. So that's sort of a technical background to this. The first step is to make sure that the items are robust, and we use factor analysis to do that first of all. Following that, we'll put it into a partial least squared model, so structural equation modeling, and then we run a series of tests. We also have a series of features inside the model which you have to account for as well. So does, for example, your geography count for anything? Does your firm size count for anything? Does the number of people that you employ count for anything? Does the number of people in your procurement team count for anything? So we have to see if these have an impact, and if they do, we disclose that. If they don't, we take it into account then that the category, the performance effect is universal, regardless of what these we call those moderators, and then the rank order then will come out of the partial least squares model, and the ranking is between each of the models that we've done over the 5 iterations. As I say again, it's remarkably consistent, and I think that's down to the time and attention that we took at the beginning of this to really think about the questions and to look in real detail at what elements of category management were the most important. I think that's paid off for us. Actually, it's been a worthwhile investment of our time at the start.
And we have iterated it, haven't we, over the time? We've added new questions in as things have become more apparent to us that they're more important. Okay, sorry, Mark.
Good.
Let's go. So now looking at the value perspective, what we did was ask questions in sort of 3 value groups. Firstly, at the top there, revenue and stakeholder value. That's things like operational performance, time to market, control of key assets, ESG commitments, all those sort of things. So we prompt people with these questions. And in that area, we prompted them with the question of, well, of the available value, revenue and stakeholder value, which looks like this, as we just said, how much have you achieved and secured? And the numbers come back and really quite shocking for the starters, down at 27%. So they're saying, they can capture another 73% of value. Improvers and leaders, double that performance, 44 and 45%, very close together. And similarly, then we asked the same question around risk reduction, and we prompted them about things like assurance of supply, commercial risk, reputational risk, and sort of saying how much of that in terms of removing those risks have you secured? And again, very similar numbers, 27, 46 and 48. So very consistent in those 2 dimensions, which tells us, there's lots of more opportunity for us to secure here. What we do see on the savings side, the performance of the leaders and the improvers is actually stronger, and they're getting 68 and 57%. But the starters is actually is worse. It's 22%. So overall, this is where the 68% of available value comes from, and it's because we did ask those questions in that particular way for revenue and stakeholder value and risk reduction. But we did something slightly different for cost savings. So we'll show you that in a moment or two. Any reflections from you, Mark, about the value that's available? Because it's been pretty consistent over the years, this one.
Yeah, I guess you can see on the pattern here that cost savings is an important feature, a bedrock, if you like, of the three groups: the starters, the improvers, and the leaders. But I think as people become more sophisticated and they ingrain category management and they get better results as a result of doing that, we seem to then see a pattern of exploring other ways in which procurement can make an impact. So revenue and stakeholder value and risk reduction. So I suppose it's a two-edged sword. You could say, on the one hand, you're doing what is expected of a good procurement team to make cost savings, but at the same time, you're creating more of a demand for your services, if you like, by looking to see how you can deliver on other forms of metric. So obviously that has an impact on how you go about doing your category strategies as well. So on the one hand, you're doing well, but you get then more demand for your time and your services, if you like.
Yeah. Any questions about this, Mark, from the audience?
What's the definition of stakeholder value?
Yeah, that comes back to these things. We put a mixture of things under it because it is the non-financial benefits that people often talk about. But we prompted people with things like operational performance, time to market, control of key assets that drive revenue for you, innovation. So there was a checklist of things. And we actually, within the report, there's actually a breakdown of how people perform against, I think it's 7 particular areas of revenue and stakeholder value, which again, we'll probably do a bit of a drill down on that subsequently because it's an area of interest to people. But yeah, we need to do a bit more, circulate that a bit more broadly. I think it's in the report, but yeah, we can do a further analysis. Okay, so on the savings side then, what we did here, we grouped 2 questions together. What's the savings rate from category strategy projects that you deliver? And you can see there it's just over 6% for starters, getting on for 9.5% for improvers, and leaders at 10.5%. So they're getting bigger savings from category projects. Whether, it does say actually annual savings, and there may be a ramp up, I would imagine, because we ask also questions about in-year benefit, and we know that that's slightly different. But you can see a ramp up in value delivery in terms of savings from category strategy projects. And also then on the left-hand side, what we're looking at is how much of the spend is actually penetrated by category management. What sort of category strategy coverage have you got? And again, it's about 40% down there with starters, improvers nearer to 70% or just over 70%. And leaders this time around, it was 78. I think it was 77, 78, something like that in terms of coverage. And the fourth piece there we've shown is the potential, because we also ask, well, what percentage could you cover of the spend with strategies? And we've gone back also to look at historically what the leaders have said. So 80% feels as pretty much a good target to aim for at a leader level. And again, the improvers are getting towards that area as well. We also asked people, what is the additional financial or the savings that you could achieve if you optimized category management? And even the leaders who were reporting 10.5%, they added another 4.3%, I think it was, to that. So people, again, at every level saying, there's more value that we can go after from a savings perspective. And again, we think it comes back to, yes, it's all dimensions of that Galbraith model. And that's the great thing about it. It's not just people's capability. It is stakeholder engagement. It is having, a manageable process that doesn't take too long to do. And does point you towards creating value and finding value. So that's what the savings perspective looks like, and that's where we derive the numbers from on the previous graph, because we use the potential number as the sort of baseline of where you could get to. I can see a question coming in there, Mark.
Yeah, it's an observation that says not all organisations are the same. Some may have a lot of low-hanging fruit or transactional and leverage quadrants, but making a dent in bottleneck and strategic categories, the more complex areas, can be more challenging. So
absolutely.
I think it's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's something in here about how the as organisations progress through their development areas, then the low-hanging stuff does tend to get addressed in many cases, which means that you actually have to use more sophisticated techniques to add more value. So you've got to be better at category management anyway to continue that value growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we saw when we in the report, there's a number of interviews, and we interviewed Pamela, who's the until recently was the CPO at Exxon Mobil. She's moved to another role in the organisation, but she very much was around having stretch targets for people in category strategies. So we're not just going after what really could be delivered through a sourcing exercise or renegotiations in particular areas. So it was really pushing the bound, and we think that's absolutely part of making category management succeed.
Another question is, what's preventing leaders reaching 14.6% today?
Because even they don't get the stakeholder buy-in. When you look at and we might have time to look at it, but when you look at the stakeholder engagement, particular graph around the questions there, they don't score as highly as their lowest scoring area. So if you haven't got stakeholders on board with you, you can't pull all the value levers, because none of them are all commercial. And even the very best struggle sometimes to get engagement on category projects, to make it a proper cross-functional team with proper, time and engagement and commitment to drive change from the business.
Another question dropped in, which is, how can you deliver on category strategies with locked-in contracts? I guess part of the answer is whether or not all of the value is associated with the contract itself. That's one element of it, but I'm sure there's a range of other ideas.
Yeah, it's not your ideal starting point, that's for sure, for most people. Most people do try and time strategy creation before the end of a contract period, so you've got enough time, enough of a window to really look at what the radical things you can do, and then start to do the things that are maybe enablers. So there is a bit of trying to time it correctly, but there are things you can do. Within that, we've seen people taking more of a supplier management approach, and again, some of the category opportunities, the way we look at strategies and we segment the opportunities is to say which ones are delivered through business change. So that could be demand management, shaping specifications, etc. Which ones are done through supplier management, and then which ones are done through sourcing. So there are those, and it's just looking at that. You're having really wide set of value levers. That means you're not just dependent on doing sourcing and driving competitive tension. Those are important in some areas, and probably, we know historically that's been what most people have used. So I think it's looking at the broader range of value levers and seeing what you can do. I mean, we've got a list of about 95, I think it is up to now, grouped into the three value dimensions that we've got earlier, because sometimes, stakeholders aren't interested in savings. They're interested in performance improvement that's going to end, with our end service rising, perhaps if we're selling our services on in a B2B or B2C environment. So definitely things to be done. Just need more a wider range of value levers being addressed, I'd say.
7 minutes.
So something we've done this time around with the report that we pulled out with more emphasis is the efficiency gains that we see as people mature in their capability of category management. So moving from starters to leaders here, what we looked at, and we've had this data, but as I said, we've not emphasized it. Spend to start with, spend per procurement team for the total head count. So if you divide your total spend by total head count, what are you going to get? And for starters, that's 34 million. For leaders, it's 76 million. So what we're seeing there is an efficiency gain. Effectively, leaders are managing their head count, so they've got 55% fewer heads managing the similar spend or the same spend versus a starter. So do category management, and as a consequence of that, what we're seeing is fewer resources required to manage the spend. And if you look, when in the report, there's also a comment about the supplier. It's actually down there, spend per supplier. The third one down is much higher, 5 times greater for leaders than it is for starters. So €1 million on the way we did the survey managed by leaders versus 200,000 per supplier for starters. So again, 80% improvement. One of the other things down there at the bottom I just wanted to highlight as well is the time to both create and implement a category strategy. Here, for starters, that's 43 weeks. I mean, that is, hopefully there's some value delivered before that point, because that's not going to really engage people. But there's massive contrast there with leaders doing this, their creation and implementation within 21 weeks. So, and again, an efficiency piece, 50% or thereabouts for leaders. So we're going to get other benefits from doing category management well, not just the savings from the supplier spend. It's about how we operate internally as well. Anything there, Mark?
Yeah, question, which is, how do we continually deliver savings for the category? Anything contractually or mechanisms to consider using? And I'm guessing that's one of the things that occurs to me there is the ability to create a longer pipeline of opportunity delivery from really good category strategies.
Yeah, multiple year sort of view of how am I going to make change happen in this particular category with the full support from the business, because some of the things will not be deliverable within a year, and it's just knowing that, like we said before, you're pushing people to be a little bit more stretching in terms of what or radical, should we say, in terms of what they're looking to achieve.
And just a reflection mark on this slide, if you're to just look behind it and say what's going on here, you probably say that it's a classic learning curve effect. So if you look at the bottom line there, 43 weeks it takes for starters to create and implement, so to think and do, whereas for leaders it's 21 weeks. And why is that the case? Probably because category management becomes more ingrained as a set of capabilities that people just know what to do. And also they've probably got their arms around the spend as well. So they're not still trying to fight to work out where the spend is, who controls it, what's the power base involved and all of that. And, what's the keep out signs, and they've taken probably the keep out signs down, and they're starting to get better, you would imagine, better results from volume consolidation and aggregation, and then start to move on to more sophisticated things. And they can actually cycle through those categories in a more efficient way, which means you don't need as many people in the procurement team, but they end up managing more spend.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a nice way of positioning the story. I think it's absolutely true. People are refreshing and adapting strategies, hopefully at the leader level, not doing it for the first time. So it is that sort of inertia that you've got to overcome. And often we find people, can get stuck in that inertia situation where it takes too long. Therefore, it becomes discredited as a way of working. Something to avoid for sure if you can do.
Just one question. Is there a category management organization is there a better structure for creating higher value?
I mean, that's one of I didn't put it in that table, but the more centralized, not fully centralized as in we do everything from, our headquarters, but, some form of centralized, you came up with the definitions, Mark, I remember, but it's some sort of centralized hybrid structure, but it's definitely, you can see that they're more, completely decentralized, some of the worst results, and completely centralized. Not many people are like that, to be fair. It's mainly some form of hybrid structure, but they generate the best results.
2 minutes.
Okay. Finally, here is a view of what is available within the report, and it's a breakdown of one of the areas. We did it here around category strategy summary, and you can see that the scores here are for leaders in green and the average scores across the organisation, across the participants in white. And very much, a big gap between leaders and the average across all areas. So that's the sort of thing that's in, each start of each dimension. When we look at that in each part of the report, the 6 dimensions, there's a view like this, so it gives a view of what the leaders are actually doing, so you can quickly see where you might want to focus. And then finally, because I know we're out of time, we'll skip this piece about the operating model for now, but we'll also just put up the link. So we see, by the way, just to clarify for people, we see a link between doing an operating model that's based on this question structure. Really helps to make a link between the procurement strategy and then the category strategy activity that's underway to give a definition of how you're doing it in your organization. And this is the report, so that's the QR link for that.
Will the slides and recording be shared?
Yes. And if anybody wants to hang around for 10 minutes and ask us some more questions, I'm happy to do that. And saying goodbye to people who have to go to their next session. So thanks for attending. Any questions coming through, Mark?
Not at the moment. Got thank you. Who's the thank yous? One in the Q&A. Would you be able to share one firm's name of a leader? I would suggest that we actually we can circle back around that, perhaps as a discussion with the person asking the question.
Yeah, or have a look in some of the previous reports, because I think some of the leaders may well be in there as some of the interviews that we've done. So there's definitely some highlighting of
good practice. Yeah, there's case studies that are throughout the report, so you can pick them up there. Recently read an article in LinkedIn stating that category management is dead, too slow and clunky. Have we got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think if you do it with a long-winded way of working without any real program management behind it, it probably is fit that sort of. But if you boil it down, this is about commercial or procurement and technical people working together to create more value. You can see from the results in the survey that there's still more value available on the table. So what else? What other mechanism have we got to get after that in a structured way? There is no plan B, I think, when it comes to this. So making it work, making it acceptable, don't make it long-winded, 100 pages. We've heard all of those sort of things many times. Can you keep it relatively light, flexible, and be realistic about the time it takes, and maybe just do a time-bound approach to category management to start with, to try and get a result in within 12, 16 weeks, and then do a next iteration of it, but don't drag it out for those sort of 43 weeks. It's far too long. And we've heard longer time as well. So it's fine to say it's dead. What is it getting replaced by? I think the question is more, how do we make it work, which is what we're trying to do with this report, really.
Unfortunately, just one comment on that. Unfortunately, for the people that think it's dead, it's actually annoyingly alive, because it creates a performance effect. So if you do category management effectively, there's a clear performance effect, and it's to be achieved. But if you're using one category management process which has got all of the tools and templates to go through in a very regimented way, and you're working in a fairly flexible environment, you're probably going to see a massive car crash, because it won't work very well. It's got to be right sized to your organization's circumstances.
Got a question that says, is there any information in the report about what a good category strategy looks like, what sort of content there is in it? It's something that we've got well defined in a set of materials. It's not specifically in the report, I think.
No, we're trying to keep it at the level of how do we create an operating model for category management. Obviously, part of that we ask, do you have an excellent toolkit that people can use and is flexible, etc., etc. So there's some broad features, but I think the kind of steps of category management are pretty well known, and there are features around how you make it successful, for sure. So happy to give a quick view to somebody if they want to drop us an email about that. What are the traits we see in a good toolkit and strategy structure versus stuff? And we've probably written a blog on it. I just can't remember when it was. But in fact, I definitely know we've written one on it because Simon Brown wrote it. So we shall point you in that direction to start with.
The case studies also in the report give nice indicators within the context of the organisation, which is also explained. Some of the nice features, some of the features that they found useful. It's written up in a really nice way actually for the cases, and I think if you had a quick look at those, it'd probably take about 5 minutes to read each one. So I think there's 4.
Yeah.
You get quite a lot from that actually.
A good question here, which is, given the extreme price volatility of lots of stuff that people are buying, how can they report year-on-year savings and how to measure their Catman performance? Especially, I suppose there's 2 bits there, which is the difficulty of measuring year-to-year savings in a volume item related business, and the other one is can you measure Catman performance?
Yeah, I mean, we've come up with 6 metrics that we think people should consider. So off the top of my head, there is the financial benefit, the non-financial benefits, there's stakeholder engagement, there is quality of category strategies. So, you know, that for me, they're 4 of the top 6 off the top of my head. But actually getting some metrics around those things, I think is really powerful. Not just the financial and non-financial, but it is the quality of what we're doing and what do our stakeholders think about it. And so, you know, we often advocate and work with clients on putting something in place at formal gateways. So you're driving feedback back to your organization to say, actually, are these people satisfied with what they're doing? Almost like, would they recommend that other people, you know, would go through this process if it's relatively new to the organization? So I think measuring that, and especially at the strategy creation point, is really powerful as well. So you can play back to people, this is the feedback we're getting, these are the words that are being told to us.
I guess the other side, which is the how do you measure savings in a volatile price environment in which prices are going up as well? Then part of the challenge is actually having a good agreement and engagement with the finance organisation. So at least there's some agreed clarity about the way in which savings actually are measured and reported. So within the organisation, it's an acceptable outcome.
Yeah, and what we did see in the report this time round was that the proportion of the savings that are reported that are hitting the P&L or are cashable in public sector terms is much lower, as we expected, because of the volatility that's gone on. So it's about 25% are cost reduction, as we'd call it. And, you know, that compares with about 48%, I think it was in the previous survey that were. So you can definitely see a slide towards cost avoidance being the way to deliver the value. Okay, if there's nothing,
I think that's it. Yeah,
that's excellent. Thank you everyone for your participation and the questions. Really enjoyed answering those, and hopefully, you know, you'll get a copy of the report very quickly. And if there's further questions, please do contact us, because we're always keen to see what your perspective is on the report and get some feedback on the content.